thinking about local news as a public good is new to funders. It is a new concept to a lot of philanthropists. I'm still a little bit amazed sometimes, but then have to remind myself some people are still not fully connecting local news to democracy. And that is something that we really have to step back. Those of us who are in the field, who are passionate about local news and information, who are passionate about journalism and democracy, we don't realize that this is a given to us. So we need to sometimes back up and explain this.
Welcome to the Local News Matters podcast, where we explore pathways to stronger journalism, better businesses, and healthier communities. I'm Tim Regan-Porter, CEO of the Colorado Press Association. This episode, I talk with Allison Taylor Levine, founder and CEO of the Local Journalism Initiative and its collaborative community-powered newsroom, Spotlight Delaware. In our conversation, Allison shares insights into how the Local Journalism Initiative's projects, including internships, collaborative partnerships with newsrooms, and community listening tours, are designed to enrich public discourse, expand access to information, and ultimately build a stronger local democracy. Before founding the Local Journalism Initiative, Allison served as Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Delaware Community Foundation, and we discussed the role community foundations play and how newsrooms might work with them to meet the information needs of their communities. If you like this episode and what we're doing more generally, please follow in your favorite podcast app, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and tell your friends about us. This is a side project and a labor of love, and your support means a lot. You can find past episodes, full transcripts, and relevant links, and sign up for our newsletter at localnewsmatterspodcast.com or for lazy typists like me at lnmpod.com. You can also follow us on most social media channels at lnmpod. And now I bring you Allison Taylor Levine. Allison, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So why don't we start with just telling us a little bit about the Local Journalism Initiative and how it got started and its purpose?
Sure. Yeah. The Local Journalism Initiative is a 501c3 that I started a few years ago. Initially started it as a fiscally sponsored project at the Delaware Community Foundation, where I was working at the time. But it got bigger and bigger, and now it's a whole grown-up nonprofit organization of its own. We started it to strengthen the local news and information ecosystem in Delaware, to strengthen our democracy and our communities. And we have several streams of work. We have an internship program that actually grew out of some pandemic funding. We started an internship program with the goal of deepening the pipeline of reporters from historically underserved and underrepresented communities here in the first state. We also did a statewide ecosystem assessment where we engaged with nearly 300 people throughout the state to learn about what they really want and need from local news, what could be done better, what was going well, what wasn't going well, etc. We also have the Delaware Journalism Collaborative, which is a convening of 23 Delaware newsrooms and community partners that are working together. That was originally funded through the Solutions Journalism Network, and that group spent the first 2 years doing a deep dive and leading community conversations around polarization. And now, as we approach the 2024 elections, they are working collaboratively to do voter education through a multi-platform, multilingual voters guide, as well as 2 debates pre-primary, which is really important in Delaware. And then our flagship project is Spotlight Delaware, which is a new collaborative, community-powered nonprofit newsroom. And we're really focused on covering the impact of public policy on people's everyday lives.
Prior to this, you were VP of Marketing Communications at the Community Foundation, right? And I've talked a lot about community foundations on the podcast, especially now with Press Forward going, and but before I got into nonprofit journalism, I didn't really know much about that world, and I'm sure there are listeners who don't understand community foundations, why they exist, how they operate. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Delaware Community Foundation, what its goals were, how it operates, and then why it thought this was a project that it wanted to sponsor.
This is a project that I sort of built in my spare time off the side of my desk while I was working at the Community Foundation. The Community Foundation did give me a fiscal sponsorship account so that I could build the nonprofit organization, but it is a fully separate initiative from the Community Foundation. Community foundations are largely collections of donor advised funds. A lot of the money that is at a community foundation is in these donor advised funds, which means that individual donors have set up what are kind of like bank accounts and deposited money there. And then from that account, they can make grants. The community foundation staff itself doesn't have much influence over the majority of those funds. Community foundations, however, typically have some what they call discretionary funds. And that is the smaller amount of money that the community foundation staff can use to try to drive change in its community. And the Delaware Community Foundation was really focused on building opportunity, which could mean a lot of different things, which is pretty typical at a community foundation. Community foundations don't usually take one or two specific things that they really try to focus on. Rather, they try to address a whole range of community needs and wants and gaps. So the Delaware Community Foundation was working on all kinds of different things, ranging from environmental issues to youth engagement to healthcare, to the environment, all kinds of different things. So that's kind of typical of what community foundations do. The Delaware Community Foundation president and CEO, Stuart Comstock Gay, and I did a lot of work together around democracy related initiatives. And that was part of his interest in allowing the local journalism initiative to have a fiscal sponsorship account there. And the DCF continues to be a key funder of the local journalism initiative now.
And of course, heads of community foundations tend to be very well connected in the community. So even if it's not a fund that they control, they're certainly helpful in understanding the needs of the community and who the players are and who might be interested in addressing certain needs in the community.
Absolutely. And community foundations, I talk about this quite a lot to different organizations around the country. Community foundations are not really the place that we as journalism leaders should be going for expecting huge grants. You're unlikely in most community foundation communities to get a six-figure grant from a community foundation, and you're certainly not going to get sustained funding from a community foundation. But a community foundation is still a great resource in a lot of other ways. A community foundation is a great convener, a great partner. They can give you a great kind of good housekeeping seal of approval and endorsement for the work that you're doing. They get behind local news and information in different ways, but we need to understand the reality of what community foundations can and can't do. They can help you connect to funders, but a lot of people in the field are under the misimpression that if a community foundation has $300 million in charitable assets, that, oh, well, they can afford to give me $1 million grant. No, most of that money is controlled, or we should say advised, by individual donors who already have causes. And the community foundation is not going to just introduce you to all of their donor advised fund holders. That's part of the job of the community foundation, is to serve as that buffer between grant seekers like me and donor advised fund holders who don't necessarily want every single nonprofit organization and cause coming knocking at their door.
Right. Absolutely. So I think that's very helpful for people to understand. And just to elaborate on your convener, I think that's an often underused function
that newsrooms don't use and probably don't do enough convening themselves. But I don't know if Delaware participated in the On the Table initiative that the Knight Foundation led. May still be going
No,
on.
no.
Okay.
Delaware's not a night community, unfortunately.
Got it. Yeah. Uh, but community foundations were very involved in that across the country, mostly, as you say, in night communities, but I think they might have branched out beyond that. But, that was a pure convening function that Knight supplied a little money for. Newsrooms often weren't even at the center of this, but they certainly could be, to just get people in the community together talking about what's important to the community, what issues it wants to address, what strengths maybe are going untapped or underutilized. So I would encourage newsrooms to think of community foundations as more than funding. And as you say, it's not nearly that simple, but also as conveners. I think that's a good point.
Absolutely. And that's something that at Spotlight Delaware, community engagement is really at the center of the work that we do. We do call ourselves a community powered newsroom. So the Community Foundation can be a great partner for us in that work. And I think that that is something that community foundations around the country can be doing in partnership with their local newsrooms, and vice versa, that local newsrooms, for profit and nonprofit, can be reaching out to create partnerships with community foundations. Because if there's one thing community foundations do really well, in addition to managing the donor advised funds and charitable investments, they are great conveners. They're great at community engagement, and they tend to have, like a newsroom, they tend to have their fingers kind of all over the community in all different areas and issues. So, like a newsroom, like reporters, they tend to know a little bit of everything about what's going on and who the people are, where the relationships are. Where the people are in the community who can really connect you and help you understand the depth of the issues.
Well, let's go back to the time when that was your day job and you decided to do this as a project. But what was going on in Delaware that you felt that there was really this need for this new initiative and eventually organization?
I think we can all look around the country and see what's happening to the local news and information ecosystem. It's not news that local news is in trouble. And that certainly was becoming more and more apparent in Delaware. I will tell you the personal part of the story. My late husband, my husband actually died in 2017. And that sort of shifted my personal perspective on things. And I think anybody who has experienced a loss like that knows that it makes you kind of reassess what's going on in your own life. And for me, it also caused me to reassess what was happening in my community. And Jason also was the editorial page editor at the local paper. So it really shifted the way I was looking at things in the ecosystem. What I saw was the local news and information ecosystem in decline, as it has been around the rest of the country. Uh, the News Journal, our local Gannett paper, getting thinner and thinner, and the online content, at the risk of sounding print centric, it wasn't just about the physical paper. The content was getting thinner and thinner too. And then in 2019, with the Gannett and Gatehouse merger, that had a significant impact on the state of Delaware. Gatehouse had a series of community papers throughout the state, including the Middletown Transcript, the Dover Post, Hocassin and Greenville Community News. And when Gatehouse and Gannett merged in 2019, those papers started to be deprecated. And some of that happened first in terms of stories just being regurgitated here and there. So instead of original content being produced in some of these smaller communities, it was just the same stories being run in multiple places. And then gradually, more and more of those small outlets were just shut down until they were completely eliminated. So things were getting worse and worse in 2019. So that was when I really started looking around and saying, what can we do about this? That also had given me a little bit of a space from the loss of my husband and getting my kids back together, and gave me a little bit of a mission. So I worked with our community foundation president and CEO, Stuart Comstock Gay, to pull together a group of funders to talk about the local news and information ecosystem. Unfortunately, that conversation was scheduled for March 20th, 2020, and the world kind of shut down about a week before that. And I said to Stu at the moment, I can remember saying it, Stu, even I can't think about local journalism right now. I know I can't get the funders to think about it. So we ended up postponing that conversation. And then I actually got pulled in at the Community Foundation to leading our pandemic grants program for the state. Um, that kind of sort of, I thought, was putting things on hold for a year. But what ended up actually happening was through the pandemic grants process, it really ended up highlighting the community's need for better quality and more local news and information. I was essentially receiving all of the grant applications from nonprofits all up and down the state of Delaware. And part of what we started to see was a lot of applications related to the need for people to have better access to local news and information. The Grant Making Council determined that none of those applications were doing quite what we needed as a community, but they did see it as a need. And what they said was, hey, Allison, we heard that you know a little bit of something about local news and information and journalism. We're going to carve out a $25,000 grant and task you with going to figure something out. Here's $25,000 to do something good around local journalism. I made some partnerships throughout the state and worked with some different folks to try to come up with some ideas. And that happened to be also right after the death of George Floyd. So the council had instructed me to also connect that to equity, to some kind of racial equity issues. So what we ended up doing was creating this internship program that was focused on increasing the coverage of the impact of the pandemic on communities of color. And we ended up funding interns to work throughout the state at different newsrooms. And that program was very successful, so successful that I was asked in subsequent years to go do some additional fundraising to keep it going because it was very popular and effective. And it turned out to be a great thing. And it also turned out that that was kind of a silver lining that my funder convening had been delayed a year, because it gave me an opportunity to sort of prove the concept and bring the issue of the importance of local news and information to communities and put it in front of funders and show them that there were things that we could do as a community, that there are things that we can do as a community. And here's a proof of concept through this one $25,000 grant. Here's one small thing we can do in Delaware. Now, we reconvened that group in April 2021, the same meeting we were going to try to have in 2020, pulled that group together, had a very small proof of concept through that internship program, began the conversation more in earnest about what could we do for our local news and information ecosystem. Why did we need to do this for our community? And created a vision for a path forward for building up the ecosystem in Delaware.
Talk a little bit about that vision and the conversation you had with funders, and maybe any, as I'm sure there are ongoing conversations with funders, and lots of listeners are thinking about that conversation now. So what is the vision? What is the need and the opportunity? And how do you convince funders to see that?
I'm a big believer in starting with why. Funding local news and information as a philanthropic endeavor, thinking about local news as a public good, is new to funders. It is a new concept to a lot of philanthropists. And I'm still a little bit amazed sometimes, but then have to remind myself, some people are still not fully connecting local news to democracy. And that is something that we really have to step back. Those of us who are in the field, who are passionate about local news and information, who are passionate about journalism and democracy, we don't realize that this is a given to us. So we need to sometimes back up and explain this. So that is exactly how I started that conversation with funders and with the funders in that April 2021 conversation. And I believe is why we exist today, because what I did was I went through the data. I showed the funders, I showed the head of these foundations what happens to a community when local news is diminished. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here. Your audience probably knows this, but we see taxes go up. We see government become less effective and less efficient. We see government salaries go up, and particularly the salaries of government employees who are the highest paid. The wage gap in government workers widens. We see violent crimes cleared at lower rates. That's just a few examples of things that happen in terms of loss of government effectiveness and efficiency. We also see loss of civic engagement. We see fewer people turn out to vote, fewer people run for office. We see fewer people contacting their elected officials. And when they do contact them, the electeds respond at lower rates. They don't call back as often. We see exacerbation of inequities in communities. We see reporters in Black and brown communities being pulled out first. We see worse worse coverage of communities that are low income communities or historically marginalized and underrepresented communities. Those are the communities where journalism diminishes the most, the fastest, and the worst. We also see increased polarization. We see split ticket voting actually drop because people just look at the R and the D. And because we don't have the local news to look at the nuances between the nuances of the differences between the candidates and to really think about their policies, we just look at the national. And if you're a D, you're obviously the same as Biden. And if you're an R, you're obviously the same as Trump. So why even think? There is, in the absence of that local news and information, we look to the national to fill the void, and national news is all about R's versus D's. So it really diminishes the community in a number of ways that are tangible, measurable, statistically significant, and that cross the spectrum of partisan interests. So if you are talking with a group of funders who happen to be of a more conservative leaning, there are plenty of arguments to share with them. There is a lot of data to show them that aligns with more stereotypically conservative values around government efficiency, government efficacy, small government, transparency, and accountability. And if you're working with a group of funders who are more traditionally left leaning, then there are lots of arguments to share with them too around the impact on historically marginalized communities, the need for narrative change, the need for nuanced stories about communities of color, about different communities, and about helping people to understand one another. So starting with why and starting with data, starting with statistically significant information helps them understand why this is something that we need as a community, that we need to think of as a public good. We cannot just depend on the free market for this anymore. And we also need to share with them and help them understand why local news isn't fully supported by the free market anymore. There are quite a lot of business people I've encountered who are largely those same as the philanthropists who don't understand the economics of the downfall of local news. They think that Gannett just doesn't know how to run a business. They think that these newspapers just need to get their act together and figure out how to maintain their bottom line. But once you map out what has happened with the evolution of the internet, the 24-hour news cycle, it becomes very clear to them why this is a business that no longer fully sustains on just free market forces. And if they understand why that's happening and why we need it as a community, then we can connect the dots to why they should be supporting it.
Yeah. I'm curious too whether you've seen in different communities there the need to almost rehabilitate the image of local news. I encountered this when I was back in Georgia, where there were some who didn't understand the economic picture and whose perception was in some cases maybe a little outdated, in some cases maybe well earned, but that their local media was somewhat exploitative, was, if it bleeds, it leads. There were stories about businesses or whatever that they didn't like. And so helping them understand that sort of clickbaity stuff, I think, is largely going away or gone away. But, there is all of this information that your local news outlets are providing. I'm wondering if you've encountered any of that sort of resistance or pushback or perception of local media as not necessarily being helpful to the community.
Definitely. And I would say I don't think it has gone away. I don't think that clickbaity stuff has gone away. I think that if it bleeds, it leads, it is still here. And we see that in a lot of media outlets. And that is part of our challenge. There are many funders at the local and national level who are very cautious about who they fund, what types of organizations they will fund, and often prefer not to fund a startup until they have seen it in action for about a year or two, because they are very concerned about inadvertently funding pink slime sites. They don't want to be part of that clickbait. And I don't think it's an I don't think it's a misconception. I think it's a reality that in a lot of cases, local news, in its fight to survive, has gone far too clickbaity. And the community sees that. And this is part of what we learned through our ecosystem assessment. The community in Delaware, at least, I've read a lot of studies from around the country, but mostly I can speak to what I know of Delaware. I was so pleasantly surprised. I was actually honored that lay people around our state understood that journalists need to get paid, and that means there have to be advertisements, that somebody has to pay for the production of local news. And they understood the need for ads, but they did also specifically, a lot of people specifically asked us, and I'm talking about teachers and mechanics and doctors. These are, people who don't know the business of journalism necessarily, saying, is there a way to make it so that it's not so much about the profit? Is there a way to make it so that, like, the journalists are working together so that we don't have, all 17 reporters covering one shooting and then nobody covering the state legislature? And what they were really asking us for, and I think this is true around the country, is they see that the business model is broken. They understand that the way we have it right now, they were asking us, could we try a nonprofit model? And they were asking us, are there possibilities for journalists to work together? Are there possibilities of collaboration? Or could they, in Delaware is a pretty small state. We're only 1 million people. You can drive the whole thing top to bottom in about 2 hours. Could the journalists kind of break up the state and cover different geographic areas instead of everybody insisting on being a statewide news outlet, and then certain parts of the state not getting any coverage and the city of Wilmington getting so much coverage? But so there were really some interesting conversations and ideas coming from the public. And that's what we tried to do as we created the vision for our path forward, is we took those ideas, those comments from the community, and married them with solutions and things, experiments that are happening around the rest of the country, and came up with this vision for Spotlight Delaware, which is a nonprofit collaborative newsroom where we do have journalists working together and trying different things. And also talking to each other so that it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about it for journalists because I went to UNC Chapel Hill for journalism school. I was trained in this very competitive journalism environment, but the kind of journalism that has really got lost is not the stuff that gets clicks. People will click on breaking news. People will click on shootings and arsons, and that's that part of our nature. We do click on that stuff. We do want to see that stuff. But public policy is not so sexy. It's harder to get clicks on those things. So that's more of what we focus on at Spotlight is kind of the second day story. We let everybody else go cover that shooting. We let everybody else go cover the latest murder or whatever. And then maybe a few days later, we're going to look at a trend story about public safety issues. Maybe we're going to look at what are some gun reform issues happening in Delaware, or what are some of the issues that might have led to that kind of shooting? Are there some public policy issues? Are there some social ills? Are there some things that our legislature could be doing differently? And we're not going to tell the public this is what we think should be done, but we do take a solutions journalism lens of looking around and saying, here are some things that are working in different communities or not working in different communities. Let's have a conversation about that. And while we're at it, here's the name of some of the legislators who are driving this kind of policy, and here's their email address. So you can call them and tell them what you think, or email them and tell them what you think.
Talk a little bit about the structure of Spotlight Delaware and how that works.
Sure. So the Local Journalism Initiative is the 501c3, and then we have multiple projects under that. Spotlight Delaware is one of the projects, and it's the very biggest project. At Spotlight Delaware, we have an editor, and we have just hired our 5th reporter who will be starting next week. So we'll have an editorial team of 6. And then we have, by September, we're going to have 5 people in operations. And one of those ops people kind of floats actually editorial and ops. That's our director of membership and community engagement. The community engagement is really critical here. And that's why I say that person kind of floats across both. Because yes, he is helping us build audience and building the top of our funnel. We have no paywall, so we depend on donations and we rely on him to help us get small dollar donations from the public. But the way we build the top of the funnel is by physically going into the community. We just completed a 12-session community listening tour, which included 2 sessions in Spanish and 1 in Haitian Creole. We are going to the parts of Delaware that are the least covered, the least heard from, the least represented, and trying to build relationships with those folks, which enriches the quality of our coverage and lifts up the voices and stories of these communities, while also helping us to build a very diverse readership, which is important to us. So our community engagement person spends a lot of time setting up these community events, but he's not the only one going to them, because that's kind of, to put it in journalist speak, none of us as reporters wanted to talk to the PR person, right? We all want to talk to the boss. People in the community don't want to talk to our community engagement person exclusively. They want to talk to our reporters. They want to talk to our editors. And frankly, our reporters and editors are the ones who need to be out there listening too. So we have really structured our journalism as a dialogue in Delaware. And I believe that's what journalism is in the modern sense. We have really evolved as a field. Similarly to the arts, I think, it used to be that journalists, we'd sit in a room and decide what needed to be told to the community, and we would tell them. And now it's much more of a conversation. We need to be listening and learning and promoting conversation, civil discourse with the community. So when we talk about community engagement here, we don't talk about doing community engagement in addition to our journalism. It is our journalism. So, Yeah, so about so 6 people on the editorial team, and then the community engagement person who crosses over both. We have a development director. We just hired a marketing manager who will be starting soon, and we are getting ready to bring in an operations director. And then there's me.
And the engagement and the journalism that is produced is freely available to the partners, right? How do you
Yes.
disseminate information? Is it available to anybody who wants it, or just people who sign up and commit to certain things? How does that work?
Well, we do have our own website and newsletters. It is freely available to everyone in the community who wants it. We don't have a paywall. I think you're thinking about our network of newsroom partners. And what we do there is we are a collaborative newsroom. So we're creating formal partnership agreements with newsrooms throughout the state. And what that means is that we share all of our content with those newsrooms, and in exchange for that they acknowledge, of course, and give us an attribution. And then they also, we don't charge them money for it, but they do agree to give us a certain amount of advertising and cross promotion, and that is different depending on the outlet. We don't expect the little one person newsroom down in southwestern Delaware to give us the same as what the anchor news outlet gives us, but we do want some level of contribution. And most importantly, when a newsroom signs on to be a partner newsroom with Spotlight Delaware, they commit to come to a monthly editorial meeting that's led by our editor in chief, Jake Owens. And what that is all the newsrooms send either their top news editor or a senior editorial staff member to participate in a monthly conversation about what the news needs are in the state. What does the community need that we're not getting to them now? Are there stories that we wish we could be doing, but we don't have the capacity to do them? Are there some trends? We had an opportunity at the last meeting where somebody in the southern part of the state mentioned that they were working on a story related to utility rates, and somebody in the northern part of the state said, "You know what? We're hearing a thing about that too." And it hasn't fully evolved yet, but we're starting to find that we can identify trends and opportunities for better stories that are more holistic and comprehensive. We're finding opportunities for example, on the Spotlight staff, we have a Spanish speaking reporter, a native Spanish speaker. In the small paper in the southern part of the state, they don't have a Spanish speaking reporter right now. So in some cases, maybe our reporter could help them out with a story if they need to interview some sources in Spanish or something like that. So we're looking for opportunities. At the Spotlight team, we sort of see ourselves as an extension of everybody else's staff to try to build up the capacity of all of those other newsrooms, as well as a convener and kind of a broker to help try to fill in gaps and maybe broker some partnerships among the newsrooms. And all of this that we're doing from based at Spotlight, we hope is going to help strengthen every individual newsroom throughout the state. And by making their products better, that should help them attract more subscribers, more advertisers, bigger audience, and build up their bottom lines ultimately too. Because what we're really trying to do is lift all boats. We're trying to strengthen the whole ecosystem here so that they can serve their communities as effectively as we know they want to.
And how many partner newsrooms do you have?
Right now we have 6 throughout the state, and we're working on some more. We just launched on March 1st, so we're still building.
And you alluded earlier to sort of the history of this field is not really collaborative. That people care about the competition and scoops and all of that sort of thing. Have you found in those initial partners, this was sort of a coalition of the willing, or was there a lot of baggage to work around and to help bring them on board?
Oh, there still is, and I think there always will be. And everybody has feelings and sensitivities, right? And yeah, we're definitely working with all of that. But we've done a lot of groundwork over the years, and that I think is something that, maybe your listeners will take heart, that this is slow going. It takes a lot of time and conversation, and people's feelings get hurt, including mine sometimes. It takes a long time to build trust. We're constantly trying to reassure our partners that we're not going to try to take your scoop. If you have a great story, we don't want to take that from you. But if you could use a hand with we'd love to help you. And partly being second day coverage, I think, helps to allay some of those fears. But there are still some folks out there who definitely see us as a threat, and I hope that over time that'll evolve. But that's okay. We're working with what we have. We also did lay a lot of groundwork through building the internship program that I mentioned that we started in 2021. That was a collaborative program. That was the first time we had 4 interns placed at 4 different newsrooms around the state. And when we constructed the model for that program, we made it a requirement that those interns had to be allowed to collaborate. That was the first time in Delaware newsrooms have collaborated. Then after that was done, then we created the Delaware Journalism Collaborative, and that helped build those muscles up just a little bit more. So by the time we were building Spotlight, folks were starting to get used to me talking about collaboration, and they weren't just laughing in my face anymore. They had a little bit of a sense of what I was talking about. So it's definitely taken a long time, and it will continue to take time.
Talk to me a little bit about LJI's financial plan and sustainability. How much is philanthropy, and how do you diversify your philanthropy to sort of provide some long-term sustainability? I noticed you've got donate buttons on your website, so you are doing, reader revenue. Yeah. So just what's the plan for, financial stability?
Yeah, absolutely. And like everybody else in the country, we're still figuring that out. I don't believe there is a magic bullet here. I think this is going to continue to evolve for all of us over time. And again, we're pretty new. So we're still definitely building out what our sustainability model is going to look like. Right now, it is largely philanthropic funding because that's how a lot of us get started, right? So we were very lucky to get a grant from the American Journalism Project, and then we got a major local grant from the Longwood Foundation, which is the DuPont Family Foundation. So those are sort of our 2 big core funders to get us off the ground. But both of those grants are going to end. So we are building up our own revenue streams. When I created the initial business plan for this, I modeled it largely after the Texas Tribune. So we built the original model on philanthropy, on 5 streams of revenue, 5 types of revenue streams. Philanthropy, meaning institutional philanthropy, foundations, corporate underwriting, events, memberships, and major gifts. Um, I have since collapsed a lot of those together. In Delaware, corporate underwriting and philanthropy are pretty much the same thing. And frankly, a lot of events roll into that too. And membership is coming along, but it is a tough row to get people to pay for news if they don't have to. It is kind of the NPR model in that way. So we are still seeking reader revenue that way. We're also finding a lot of success now, which I did not anticipate, with sponsored content. It was not something I was excited about doing at first, but we have created some very strong policies around what sponsored content can look like. And what we found is that because of the audience that we're building, we have we're serving a lot of audiences that are historically underrepresented and under-resourced. that need access to information about how to reach publicly available resources. And that is actually something they told us in our ecosystem assessment is we know the state has resources. We know there are small business loans, there are job training programs, there are childcare supports. We just don't have the information about how to get it. So what we're finding is that by creating sponsored content, what we're finding is that creating sponsored content allows us to provide that kind of information to communities that need it by creating a platform for government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and foundations that need a place to tell their stories. So we're really connecting some dots here by focusing on mission-aligned sponsored content, and then those dollars that come from that sponsored content are underwriting independent, nonpartisan, local news and information. And both of the players get excited about that too. So the folks in government and nonprofit and foundations are very happy to spend their marketing dollars with us because they know that we are mission aligned. They know that we're a nonprofit. We're not paying for somebody's Ferrari with the profits from this. That money is going back into our organization to pay for reporters to cover the community, and that is also serving their interests. So it has turned out to be a real, I hate this hackneyed phrase, but it's turned out to be a real win-win for everybody.
And last topic before we go into rapid fire, you have a background in marketing communications as well as journalism. And I think a lot of people who haven't spent time in newsrooms or around journalists would think that marketing and communications might come naturally, that we're, natural storytellers, but we don't like to talk about ourselves. And, there's a beat structure that makes what we do talk about pretty narrow. And people don't understand what we do, why we do it, what we're about. So does that background that you bring now to LJI, can you talk a bit about how that influences how you think about the organization, how you think about your communications?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that it's a real blessing. This is the convergence of my whole career path, really. I did start my career as a newspaper reporter. I had wanted to be a reporter since I was 10 years old, working at the Summers Elementary Scoop in North Central Florida. I wanted to hold power to account and follow the money and make sure the truth was out there. And I did that. As I mentioned, I went to journalism school and I was a reporter. So um, I understand that world pretty well. And then I spent a long time in government and nonprofit marketing and communications, including the previous 12 years in communications for philanthropy. So I like to say, I speak journalist and I speak funder. And I love I love this role that I have. I feel really privileged to be kind of the bridge. And because I have been doing marketing and communications for so long, yes, absolutely, it helps me to be able to tell the story of our work as journalists and as advocates for democracy. There's a lot that I do not have experience in and do not officially know how to do, but boy, am I learning on the job. There are a lot of operational things and finance things and HR type things that I've had to kind of get with the program, but it definitely has been a path that I think that the marketing background definitely helps me to make the case, and then I can get a lot of smart people around me to help me with all the other stuff, and that includes particularly my editorial team, who I just admire up and down the hills. So.
And I think, one of the things that's come through as you talk about what the organization is doing, it's not just talking about what you do to the funders, it's also what you talk about and how you listen to the community. Often they don't understand what we do and we don't listen to them in terms of what they need. So I think the marketing and communication encompasses all aspects of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also I have a real passion for community. I personally have a very small biological family, but Delaware, and I think people have this in a lot of communities, but I feel very fortunate that I have such deep community here, and that's really important to me. And I want other people to have that too. In sort of academic terms and sort of fancy terms, we talk about that as social capital or social fabric. And I'm very passionate about how we can build that and help people feel connected to one another. And I think that is really the marriage of all the work that we do. And we talk about this in our newsroom that Spotlight is a little bit unusual because we are a newsroom, but we also operate kind of like a nonprofit organization. We are a nonprofit, but we spend a lot of time talking about strategy and community and mission. And it's experimental, but so far so good.
All right, now for the rapid fire questions. And the questions are short, but your answers don't have to be. And I may even ask you to elaborate from time to time. So, compared to a year ago, are you more or less optimistic about the future of local news?
Totally optimistic.
What gives you that optimism?
Oh, I actually gave a presentation about this recently at the Maryland, Delaware, DC Press Association. There are more than, I think it's 440 nonprofit news organizations around the country that are part of INN. There are folks like us who are trying to build democracy from the ground up all over the place. I have never seen this evolution as the death or the decline of local news. I've always seen it as the evolution of local news. And I'm so excited that more people around the country have kind of embraced this as a change. We've got out of this whole, the sky is falling, print is dead, oh, it's all the end of the world. And now we're moving past that and thinking about how people consume information and how they need it and want it. And I'm just excited about how we're growing.
Does AI fill you with more hope or dread when it comes to journalism?
Actually, neither. I'm completely neutral. I think AI is a tool. I think it's computer just like everything else, and it's just something that we will work with. And it's another thing where, like when the car was created, or like when social media came out, we all thought it was gonna, the aliens were gonna take over the world and kill us all. No, it's just an evolution.
Messy desk or clean desk?
It's kind of in between.
All right. Do you have a favorite piece of advice that you've been given or that you like to give?
Yes, it was personal, but I find it useful in the professional world too. When my husband passed, I had a hard time at first accepting help, and my boss, actually, Stuart Comstock Gay, who I mentioned, he sat me down and said, "Allison, when you let somebody help you, you are giving them a gift." And that freed me to allow people to help me. And I hold on to that to this day. Letting people help you is giving them a gift.
Is there a piece of common advice or conventional wisdom that drives you crazy in its oversimplification or just wrongness?
It'll all work out. That's the one that bothers me. Is of course it's going to work out one way or another, but that's not it's not helpful. It'll all work out.
Do you have a favorite failure of yours, something that maybe put you on a new path or was just a crucial learning experience?
I have so many failures that have been good learnings. I once lost a job because I was trying to help someone, and it just kind of turned out wrong. And I look back on that, and of course at the time it was traumatizing, but I think in retrospect my heart was in the right place. So I was trying to do the right thing, and it caused a lot of problems, but I looking back I was trying to do the right thing, and I'm okay with that now.
This is a hard industry. It's hard to be alive. Sometimes it feels like we're talking days after the shooting at the Trump rally. And news media, sometimes, journalists get caught up in not only covering it, but being the target sometimes of vitriol. And then just making it all work is challenging. How do you restore, how do you maintain your sanity or just kind of restore yourself?
I have two things. One is exercise. It seems simplistic, but I do really love to get caught up in a exercise driven and adrenaline rush. I mean, and the other is just being with I have adult kids and just hanging out with my kids. They're good people and they give me some hope that maybe we're doing something right. Maybe I did something right. I'm doing something right. Maybe we're all doing something okay.
And as a leader, I'm very worried about burnout in our field. As a leader, is there something you do or you'd recommend people do to help their staffs maintain some sort of equilibrium or mental health?
I insist on taking all of my PTO, and I insist that my staff take all of their PTO. Do not leave PTO on the table. That is like handing part of your salary back to your organization. And yeah, no, take your time off. Go on a trip.
All right. Do you have a favorite time-saving hack?
I do calendar blocking religiously. So I think that's really useful and it helps me avoid getting overwhelmed. I used to keep a to-do list and it would get to 4 pages and I would throw my hands up in despair. And now I just kind of map out on my calendar. Okay, I need to review the development plan. I'm going to do that 11 o'clock on Thursday. Then I don't have to worry about why haven't I reviewed the development plan yet? Yeah.
Great. And do you just use Google or Outlook for that, or do you have a tool?
No, it's just on my calendar right there, next to doctor's appointments or meet the kids for dinner or whatever it is.
5 years out, what does success look like for LGI?
Oh, gosh, we have big dreams, but I would love to see I want to build Spotlight really strong for Delaware. But as we are doing that, we are documenting our processes because I would like to then take this model after we've worked out a lot of kinks and take it to other communities that are similar to ours. And it's not going to fit perfectly anywhere, but how can we take this collaborative, community-centered model and help other communities tailor it to serve their communities too? So I think that's sort of the big vision. It may take more like 7 years, I think, to really get us strong enough to where I can then start to do more work around the country. I'm doing a little bit now, but helping other communities to do this kind of work. We also have a lot of other visions for the local journalism initiative. We aspire to one day bring documenters to Delaware. I would love to start an arts journalism initiative in Delaware, and we want to strengthen our youth programs. But that's sort of the core of the vision is let's make Spotlight strong and work out some of the kinks and build a sustainable model and then take it to other parts of America where communities need access to local news. I really see this as a democracy movement. This is really about building democracy from the ground up because the top down doesn't seem to be working very well right now.
And then now for the final two questions are their recommendations. So, someone that's visiting Delaware, what are 3 to 5 activities or places you would recommend?
Delaware beaches are spectacular, so definitely there. And I love it's technically right over the border. Longwood Gardens is right over the border in Pennsylvania, but that is a favorite spot. And I also love Lum's Pond. Delaware has an unusually fabulous state park system, and Lum's Pond is one of my favorite state parks.
Are there any holes in the wall or unique cuisines you would recommend?
My favorite is this little hole in the wall called Star of India in Ellesmere. Takeout only.
Great. And then final question, 3 to 5 pieces of media that you would recommend to the audience.
Oh, I'm a big fan of Jessica Yellen, News Not Noise. I love The Second Mountain by David Brooks. I love the evolution and his story, the growth. And my favorite book is What is the What by David Eggers.
All right. Well, great. Thank you very much for your time. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. It was fun. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Local News Matters podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing in your favorite podcast player and sign up for our newsletter at lnmpod.com. And thanks to our production partners at Pirate Audio. Pirate Audio believes every community deserves great things to listen to, and they're on a mission to help local newsrooms reach their communities via audio. If you're interested in starting a podcast or need production support for an existing one, let me know and I'll be happy to connect you. If you have guest recommendations, others doing interesting and innovative work in local news, let me know through the contact form at the website lnmpod.com.